Okay, hello, I'm Stefan Zager. I am an engineer on the rendering team, the web platform rendering team at Google, and I'm here to talk about what we have in store for the year 2022. This is a biased view, and my bias will probably become clear as I go along. But let's start. I just want to say at the outset, this is an exciting time to be working on rendering. I've been on Chrome for over 10 years. I've been on the rendering team for over 6 years. I think this is the most excited I've ever been since I've been working on rendering. We are right on the cusp of having our new, exciting, modern, wonderful platform for doing future rendering work. This has been really a long time in the making of a number of projects that really just fundamentally rebuilt and modernized the rendering engine from the ground up. These would be, I would say, the big ones. In particular, the first two. So Composite After Paint reorders the paint and composite layer allocation steps of the rendering engine, and also importantly decouples our logic for allocating composite layers from web content. So it doesn't just depend on style and layout anymore. Layout NG is a complete rewrite of our layout engine based on the principle of constraint-driven layout, which has been really critical in enabling a lot of features. And then I want to call out Squad, which is a project to ensure that the output of the style resolution phase is immutable and read-only for later stages of rendering. So the unifying principle behind all of these projects is that the rendering pipeline should be truly a pipeline. It should be effectively functional in the sense of, the mathematical sense of defined inputs, defined outputs, and deterministic repeatable behavior. And then I borrow the term worm from recordable, removable storage media, but it's the idea that, like the old recordable CDs, they should be burned once and then read only forever. So that's what we're trying to do with all of the data components that pass through the rendering pipeline. They are writable once during the stage that we are doing, and then after that, they are readable for everyone. Okay, so what's it look like? Everybody loves a good flow chart. No one loves a good flow chart on a slide deck more than me, so here you go. I also love rockets and rainbows. Basically, we used to have a real mess of a system where everything reached into everything else. Everything was permanently writable, and we just kind of mucked with things at all different stages of the pipeline and really didn't know what was going on at any given time. We've turned this into a much more controlled pipeline where we know exactly what goes into each stage, we know exactly what comes out of each stage, and we make sure that outputs are immutable once we're done writing them. So going forward, I'm going to mention a few projects that we're working on. I can't give you a laundry list of everything that the rendering team is working on in 2022. Come to some of our meetings if you would like to hear all of that. But what I'd like to do is really focus on projects that we are planning to do that really leverage this new architecture and take best advantage of it. Projects that really would not have been possible on the old architecture. Let's see. But let's not get too far ahead of our skis. Rendering NG is almost done. As Chris says, 99.5%. Composite After Paint, I'm happy to report, has shipped a stable channel, but we're still working through some existing bugs and new regression bug reports. And the last big piece of Layout NG is support for fragmentation, meaning multi-column and pagination. And that is expected to ship by the end of Q2 of 2022. And then, like any good construction crew, we need to clean up our work site when we're done. I anticipate a lot of really satisfying code deletion. And then a lot of this work is going to reveal some pretty low-hanging performance fruit, which we want to grab as soon as possible. Okay, so rendering NG will be fully shipped and enabled soon. What next? I would like to call out some high-profile feature work that web developers have been really excited about and clamoring for a long time that is much easier now with the new architecture. Recently, first of all, credit where it's due, I pinched this slide from Mason Fried, who gave a lightning talk previously. In the last couple of years, we shipped the CSS accent color property to allow you to apply color theming to form controls, and also a complete visual overhaul of the form control widgets, which was really enthusiastically received by the developer community. I'd like to take a brief moment to acknowledge the big contribution of the Edge team at Microsoft to this project. It was a really great example of collaboration between these two teams. There is clearly an appetite for further improvement to form controls. And so, as Mason explained before, we are planning on shipping the select menu, pop-up elements, and also some sort of API for anchor positioning, meaning basically anchoring the position of one element to the position of another, which sounds like not that big of a deal, but honestly, anchor positioning probably wouldn't have been possible without layout NG. Okay, another one is CSS container queries. We've all heard a lot about that. This is probably, I would say, the biggest CSS power feature that I can remember in recent memory. It's best understood as basically a media query based on the size of some ancestor element, ancestor containing element. It promises to be really an amazing tool for dynamic and adaptive styling of content. The technical underpinning of CSS container queries is the ability to interleave style resolution with layout, which is something we'd always done as completely separate top to bottom tasks. But the only way to do CSS container queries is to interleave them. And the only reason that we can interleave them is because of layout NG and some excellent work done this year by Anders. So well done, Anders. And then more broadly, there is an effort underway to just sort of make it much easier for web developers to do really high quality UI stuff on the web. We call this fluid and flexible. I got permission to use that name, although I'm not sure if it's public effort at the moment, but I don't really have any more details on it. There's a lot of strands to it. A lot of it involves CSS features and form control work and other things. If you're interested in this, you can speak to Nicole or Una. Okay, I want to move quickly because I want to allow some time at the end. Now we're getting closer to topics that are near and dear to my heart, which is performance, all things performance related. Let's see. Okay, our thoughts about performance are really driven right now by these two key insights. And I should say, we've gone through many iterations of performance insights and rendering, but right now I would say these are the driving ones. One thing that really came into focus last year is how closely linked rendering is to battery life. It turns out that rendering, the core rendering pipeline accounts for approximately half of all renderer process CPU cycles on Android. It's probably on par or even more than JavaScript, which I think would be surprising to a lot of people. And remember, this is not main thread. This is a whole renderer process, so it includes everything that the compositor thread is doing as well. Credit goes to Phil Rogers for figuring this out and drawing attention to it. I think what happened was when we shipped Composite after Paint, we realized some sort of raw performance benefits, and it translated quite directly into battery life improvements. So the insight is any sort of raw algorithmic improvements to the way we do rendering, not reordering work, but just figuring out how to do less work, will translate directly into better battery life. And then the other insight is this idea of smoothness. And I just want to say, if you are watching this session, it means you're not watching the session about our new effort at defining smoothness metrics. And I really do recommend that you go back and watch it later. I definitely plan to. But the perception of smoothness and rendering smoothness in particular is really critical when it comes to users' perception of the quality of web. I think it's very intuitive that when you're using a web page and everything's scrolling smoothly, and then all of a sudden it starts glitching and janking, that is the point where a lot of users will, come to the conclusion that this site is bad, or this browser is bad, or this app is terrible. So we really want to focus on how to smooth that out and get really consistently good animations and rendering performance without skipping frames. Good news is the new rendering architecture gives us a lot of opportunities to improve this. Okay, so in the short term, Composite After Paint has really sort of unshackled us from a lot of artificial constraints we used to have about how to allocate composite layers. And there are a lot of ideas, big and small, that can take advantage of this. I've included just a couple of examples here, which I think are just notable because they're so silly that they seem obvious. But one is, whenever you have a text area and there's a blinking cursor in it, we have to keep pumping main thread animation frames to blink that cursor, which seems crazy. So one of the things that we plan to do as soon as possible is use give the blinking caret its own composite layer and drive the blinking animation on the compositor thread. And then another one is the main thread spends a lot of time decoding animated GIFs. There's really no reason why that has to be done on the main thread. We should be driving that on the compositor thread. The next one is something I don't know as much about as Ian Kilpatrick, but text shaping of glyphs for font rendering takes a lot of time, and we now have a pretty clear architectural way to simply package that work up and do it on a worker thread that will free up more cycles on the main thread. And then these last two projects are ones that we've actually started work on, and that I have started work on, and I'm very excited about. So the commit phase, if you're not familiar with it, I'm going to jump back for a moment to this slide. You can kind of intuit what the different rendering stages are that are represented here. Once we have composite layer allocation, this purple phase right here would be where we have a synchronization step between the main thread and the compositor thread. What we do is we block the main thread entirely to give the compositor thread the opportunity to copy data across the thread boundary, to take main thread data structures and copy them over to compositor thread data structures. This seems foolish to me to have to block the main thread for this purpose. We should instead allow the main thread to continue doing main thready stuff and only block the main thread when it actually is trying to modify something that the compositor thread needs access to during this commit phase. So that's what non-blocking commit is. This project is greatly simplified by the new Composite After Paint architecture. I actually have a working prototype of it now, and we are in the process of trying to get some good performance numbers off of it. Unfortunately, I don't have it yet, but I can browse the web with it, and nothing has broken yet. And then beyond that, if you look at the next, let's take this light blue phase. I don't know if you all can see my cursor, but the second stage down is where we take the display list and convert it into composite layers. That's what we call the layerization or composite layer allocation phase. That's the essence of Composite After Paint, is that we do that step last before commit. And there's no reason why we need to run that stage on the main thread at all. So going back to these slides, off main thread compositing is simply a project to move that thread boundary so that we make the hop over to the compositor thread one stage earlier and do composite layer allocation on a worker thread that is directed by the compositor thread. And the potential there is that we are simply freeing up more runway for the main thread. The main thread is the one that typically gets congested when a page is busy, and it's typically the one that contributes most to janky rendering. And we're just going to give them a little bit more headroom to do more work. Looking beyond this immediate batch of projects, once we've moved compositing off the main thread, why not move paint off the main thread? Why not move pre-paint off the main thread? That's going to be a lot harder than moving compositing off the main thread, but it's also potentially going to have a much bigger payoff. So we are already kind of letting it rumble around our heads how we might get to a place where we can do paint and pre-paint off the main thread. A big piece of that is going to be the work of the layout team. They are planning, as I understand it, as soon as layout NG is shipped, to start looking at how to prepare the fragment tree, which is the immutable output of layout, to be suitable for running paint off of the main thread. And then also hit testing. Hit testing is a curious one. I don't know if people think about it that much, but currently when you run a hit test to target an input event, we have to do a synchronous rendering update through layout clean on the main thread in order to target the event. It's a performance problem, but if you think about it, it also raises some subtle correctness issues in the sense that if you're targeting an input event, you may wind up hit testing content which has never been displayed to the user, which seems bad. So the alternative to this would be to perform a hit test against the most recently displayed version of content. And layout NG is going to enable us to keep around a fragment tree in an immutable state that represents the last painted output. And we can simply hit test against that without having to force a synchronous lifecycle update. And then if you think about it one step further, why do we need to even run the hit test against the fragment tree on the main thread? If the fragment tree is immutable, why can't we just ship the fragment tree off to the compositor thread and do complete event targeting on the compositor thread before we ever hit the main thread with an event? So that's it. That's my content. We're really excited about this. There's a lot of really fun work that we're going to do starting next year. And I will open the floor to anybody who has a comment or a question or can juggle. And if not, I'm happy to give you your time back.
I can do a quick couple of like clarifications for the like the parallel shaping stuff. We're sort of just experimenting with that at the moment. We're not sure if it'll give us like we're just trying to see if there's the bang for the buck type of thing there. So it's currently just like we're just prototyping with it. We'll see if we like actually throw people behind that or not. But basically, there's sort of two separate projects there. There's one where we can easily pre-shape like everything in the page ahead of time in parallel. There's some complexities with that, but that basically can effectively cut out a lot of the shaping time on initial page load. And there's something that we're looking at also that we're investigating as experimental, which is called like deferred shaping, where we can sort of determine if there's blocks where we don't need to like shape it initially for layout.
And one thing we haven't discussed in a while, but I believe there was a proposal a while back to do word breaking or line breaking opportunities on a thread before style sheets have even loaded. So once you have the text content, you actually don't need style sheets to figure out where it's possible to insert line breaks. So another possible text rendering threading thingamajig.
Yeah, that's sort of one of the like, if we can work out there's enough gain from parallel text shaping, it's sort of the next logical step is to also do things like segmentation and stuff like that, and all of that is like bundled quite separately.
I'm going to read a couple. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to answer Riley's question, if that's okay, Stefan.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's not that the like container query is sort of impossible with a layout NG architecture. It's just that it's like we sort of didn't. It's very, very difficult and highly prone to bugs, if that makes sense. So because we have now with layout NG a very, very clean, like um, constraint-driven like input output of layout. Um, it's like very, very clear like what state we're depending on and like when it's safe to run this like style recalc on a subtree and things like that. Um, like we could have done container queries without layout NG, but we'd be fighting bugs for about a year at least. It's the same thing with like writing modes. Previously, we had like a lot of bugs with writing modes being like super, super buggy. And layout NG basically fixed the majority of the writing mode bugs that we had. So hopefully we'll be able to like ship container queries with like very, very few bugs, if at all.
Okay, so there are a couple of questions about basically are we going to ship features that are inherently not interoperable because they are too closely tied to our particular rendering architecture? I think it's useful to separate rendering stages up to and including layout from the rendering stages that come after layout. All of our performance improvements that come after the layout stage should be completely invisible to the web platform. They won't change the web platform interface at all. They're just meant to improve performance. So these are my favorite kind of projects actually because they have the potential of improving the performance of every page on the web, old and new, without without it being visible to users or developers, or without it being visible to developers at all, without them having to do anything. As for the feature type stuff like container queries and anchor positioning, I mean, it is. I would just say it's not for us to opine on what other engines are capable of. We don't ship these things without going through standards processes first. And if the other browsers think they can do it and they support the feature, then who are we to say that it's going to be too hard to implement in Gecko? Another one.
One sort of interesting thing there is that Gecko actually were ahead of us for a long time in that they, I believe, could run recalc style during layout relatively safely. And that's something that we really couldn't do that easily. So in some sense, Gecko were ahead of us in these types of things.
There's another question up here about timeline. So it's really about layout NG. So maybe you want to address this one. It's details on the timeline for layout NG. Is it going to land all at once, or will this be incremental performance improvements?
Yeah, so layout NG has sort of been landing, for the past few years. We've been sort of incrementally switching layout mode by layout mode over. So the most recent part was done by the Microsoft folks with GridNG, and that cut out a huge set of performance cliffs with a whole bunch of correctness fixes as well, which was really, really great to see. The sort of last parts are basically all fragmentation related. So specifically, fragmentation is when you've got a multi-col where an element will split up into multiple parts. So you can have multiple boxes for an element, or printing, which is a similar thing. You can have an element split across multiple different pages. The reason this is sort of last and taking so long, quote unquote, is that we have fundamentally a different architecture now that will actually create a separate data structure for each separate box, rather than doing paint tricks, effectively what we did previously. We're sort of nearing, this is sort of, Morten has been working diligently on this for the past, quite a while, several quarters. We're nearing completion for block fragmentation with multi-column. That's nearing code completion very, very soon, like in the next few weeks. We're adding fragmentation to grid, which is what I'm working on, Flexbox, which is what Alison at Microsoft is working on, and tables, sort of probably in the next few months as well. And then we expect sort of Q1, Q2 will be focused on getting printing fragmentation shipped. And then after that point, there's going to be a huge amounts of code being ripped out. Because currently, when we hit a fragmentation context, we'll fall back completely to the old engine. Did that
Okay.
answer the question? I hope so.
I'm going to try and hustle through a couple of questions here. So there's a question about hit testing the stale content. Yes, there's definitely an issue around element from point versus event targeting. I would say this gets to be a subtle issue. I think for element from point, we definitely need to do synchronous content updates still. It's more about event targeting hit tests where we can see a benefit. And the reason is because no one but God can tell you when an input event actually arrived. So if we hit test against a stale content, we can simply wave our hands and say, well, that input event actually came in a few milliseconds earlier. So the content was current then. In other words, sort of below the threshold of what is specified in the HTML standard. So I think we can get away with it, but we will only know for sure when we start getting bug reports, when we ship it and start getting bug reports. There's a lot more to say about the hit testing thing, and I don't think I can go into it and do it full justice in the minute that we have left. So I'm just going to table that one for now. There's another question about composite after paint, compositing decisions, and whether that changes the guidance that we give to developers about how to optimize their pages by tweaking compositing triggers like will change transform or things like that. I would say that's also a complicated question. I think my top of the head answer is that what we hope is that we will just do the right thing more often now, that we will remove some of the burden of developers having to think about that. And instead, we can tune our algorithms based on the current performance levels of the system. Are we under memory pressure? Are we missing animation deadlines? I consider it a little bit of a shortcoming of the web platform that developers ever really had to put this much thought into compositing. And I hope that we can remove that burden from them. And anything more than that, I think, is more than I can get to in this session. Are we done? I think we're done. Yes. Thank you all. Good questions.